Hi all, this video is going to be a bit different to the other ones on this channel. It's about Yemen and the crisis that's going on right now that isn't really being reported anywhere, or reported at least as much as it should be. Obviously, I know we have the pandemic, we have loads of wars and so on, but I think that, I mean, it's been dubbed the world's worst humanitarian crisis, and I don't think that it's being treated as such, especially during the pandemic. And so I just wanted to shed some light on what's going on over there, because before researching it for a couple of hours in preparation for this video, I literally had no idea what was happening, especially not the extent to which everything was happening. So I hope this video can help to show you something that odds are most of, well, if anyone watches this, odds are most of you don't know too much about, and hopefully it will incentivize you to go and donate wherever you can and help wherever you can, because this isn't, even if everyone were to turn around and change and donate lots and go and volunteer and stuff, it still wouldn't be over. This is going to be a long struggle for Yemen. I think that we need to start banding behind them in a way that we haven't done for a lot of other countries who also need the help. But I think that if there's somewhere where we should start, it should be here. So without further ado, onto the video. A few facts and figures. Yemen used to be the heart of ancient Arabia, and now it's one of the poorest, if not the poorest, country in the Middle East. Right now, the Saudis are bombing Yemen, as well as there being an internal civil war. So there's a lot of conflict. As I said, it's been dubbed the world's worst humanitarian crisis by the United Nations, and there's famine, drought, disease, infrastructure's failing. Anything that could go wrong has gone wrong, and people are exploiting these weaknesses of the country in that food and aid are all being used as recruitment tools to get children and families into the war effort, which is tearing the country apart in and of itself. At best, the per capita income in Yemen is around $900 per year, which is unimaginable for you and I, because $900 is nothing. And their standard of living is very, very low. Their healthcare system is pretty much non-existent right now, especially with the political aspect and the military aspect. It's made everything very, very tight, and there are a lot of innocent Yemenis who are being caught up in this struggle that they shouldn't have to worry that they're going to be bombed at any moment and that their children are going to die or be severely retarded if they don't, because of malnutrition, because of famine, and just because of a lack of care. You can't get the care that you need if there's none available. Right now, there are 60 million people there on the verge of famine, and one child dies every 10 minutes. More than 11 million children are in need of humanitarian aid, and that's nearly every Yemeni child. The population of Yemen is 29 million, and those who are in need of quite urgent humanitarian aid are 24 million. That's 83% of the country is in desperate need. And to put that more into something tangible, that is almost the entire population of Australia. So Yemen has been war-torn for over 5 years, and over 100,000 people have died in the wars. I say wars because you have the civil war inside of Yemen, and then you have the Saudi Arabian intervention as well, which I personally class as a war, and I'll go into that a bit later. So a bit of history behind like when and how the war started. We have Ali Abdullah Saleh, and he was the president of Yemen for over 20 years, from 1990 to just past 2010, and he said that ruling Yemen was like dancing on the head of snakes. Yemenis rose up against him in 2011, and this is because they had suffered quite a bit under his rule. Saudi Arabia, which is one of Yemen's neighbours, is one of the most influential members in the countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council, or the GCC. The GCC oversaw negotiations to force President Saleh out of Yemen's rule and helped to install a new government in Yemen under Mansour Hadi, who had previously been the vice president under Saleh. At face value, the deals that they made should have helped Yemen, but instead hindered it. Suffering continued under Hadi, and the powers of Saleh's time remained, even though people assumed that they would be pushed out alongside Saleh. So we have the Houthis and a lot of other insurgent groups, but the Houthis are the most important ones. The Houthis are a Shia Muslim minority from northern Yemen, as opposed to the majority Sunni Muslim population, and they've always said that they felt marginalised, overlooked and discriminated against by the government and the rest of the country, and whenever they rebelled, they justified it by saying that it was in order to be treated fairly, as opposed to how they had been before. And they started to lose patience in 2014, because the Houthis and Saleh were both pushed aside by the GCC's plan for a new government, and in 2014 they ended up joining forces and took over the capital of Yemen, called Sana'a. This whole period, so between 2010, 2011 to maybe 2014, 2015, is referred to as the Arab Spring, and it's the series of anti-government protests, uprisings and armed rebellions across the Arab world. It wasn't just in Yemen, it was everywhere, but it's very important in the story behind why Yemen is as it is today. The Houthis were instrumental in the protests against Saleh, and the fact that they were pushed aside meant that they ended up, I guess the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they were pushed aside by the GCC, so they ended up coming together with Saleh, or at least Saleh's allies at the time. In 2014, as well as taking over Sana'a, because the Houthis were capitalising on the weakened government, they took control of major northern cities. So Yemen is it's quite long, and so imagine that this is the country. This is where the Houthis are, and this is the rest of it. So it's quite unbalanced, just as a bit of context. At this time, Hadi fled to Saudi Arabia, and then some of the countries with Saudi Arabia, some of the Northern African and West Asian countries, formed a coalition called the Arab Coalition to return Hadi to power. Some of the countries in this were Egypt, Morocco, Jordan, Sudan, and the UAE. So the war aims that at this time the war was starting. So the aims behind this war were to return Hadi and his government to power, protect Saudi Arabia's southern border and prevent Yemen from splitting up, to maintain the idea of Iran's growing influence in the region. So there are only three, and the Saudi Arabians thought that it would be over quite quickly. And looking back, hindsight is 2020. It's ongoing. It's almost been 6 years of the Saudis fighting pretty much like a foreign war against Yemen. And so this is where the Saudi-led intervention comes in. In the past 5+ years, there have been over 19,000 airstrikes, and while these allegedly were targeting the enemy, in reality they have bombed dozens of hotels, markets and schools, and funerals and towns, and it's quite horrific, and they've killed thousands of innocent Yemenis. It's quite an indiscriminate campaign, even though it shouldn't be, because if they're going in there with the purpose of, it'd probably be to get rid of the Houthis and the groups that caused Hadi to leave. So it's hard to see if the motive is actually pure when you see the huge effects it's had on the entire population. During this time, half of the health facilities have been destroyed by the whole conflict. And as we fast forward to now, with the coronavirus pandemic, it's so hard for them to fight it, and there are barely any specialists, there's barely any tools or medicines or anything or even like sanitary places to be housed or to be kept if you're in recovery. It's just a place where all these diseases can fester because there isn't enough to go around, and this is why, as I mentioned earlier, aid and so on, it's all being used as a tactic by the different sides in all of the conflict instead of to actually help the population. So in 2017, the Houthi and Saleh alliance broke down after they had been fighting the Saudi Arabian forces for around 3 years, or the Saudi Arabian led, because I guess the whole coalition came together. Saleh switched sides on live television, and he said that he wanted to talk to the coalition, but the Houthis didn't react very well to this, and they killed him 2 days later. To this day, the Houthis still control Sana'a, but Saudi Arabia thinks that this whole thing is because they're working with Iran, that the Houthis are working with Iran. Iran has openly supported the Houthis, and this is because Iran is a Shia power. In fact, it's the region's biggest Shia power, and the Houthis are a Shia minority in Yemen. So it kind of makes sense because they're religiously on the same page, but Iran has denied that they have been backing the Houthis militarily. But this conspiracy has added to the tension. Essentially, the war is foreign. Yemen is just the location that they've decided to go against each other. And the thing is, it's not, you can't even say that it's only in the Middle East, because the more Western countries, the UK, the US, and France, they've all provided weapons to like Saudi Arabia and so on. And so it's, everyone's involved, but no one's really looking at it as they should. Since October in 2016, Yemen has been suffering from the biggest outbreak of cholera in history. As of 2018, in October, so 2 years after, more than 1.2 million cases had been reported, and more than 2,500 people, 58% of which were children, were dead because of cholera. 16 months passed before oral vaccines were provided in May 2018. And cholera is only deadly if you let it become deadly. It's not hard to catch or diagnose or fix, but I think that in those 16 months, that was when it was most uncontrolled, and it wouldn't have been hard for countries, for anyone, to redirect some funds towards vaccinations and providing oral vaccines and so on. Oral vaccines, to deliver them as well as just provide them, it costs less than $10 per person, or £7.82. That's it. That's, to put that into some kind of perspective, that's a meal at McDonald's, or like a coffee from Starbucks and a little cake or a cookie. It's not much at all. And to imagine that there have been so many lives lost, and so many people's lives, their standards of living, which were already bad before, have been decreased even further by this outbreak and by this illness, it's really, really hard to like wrap your head around, because somewhere like in England or in more Western countries, you don't really hear about cholera or like malaria or any of that, because it's so easy to deal with. And yet, you know, on the other side of the world, this is what they're having to go through. Everything was worsened in this outbreak by the ongoing civil war, because the airstrikes from the Saudis specifically damaged hospital infrastructure, the water supply and sanitation, everything, just the quality of everything decreased, the availability of everything decreased, and it was worsened even more by the fact that the government stopped funding public health in 2016. So this means there was no money for health workers, and so the health workers started to leave. The UNICEF and World Health Organization executive directors stated that this deadly cholera outbreak is the direct consequence of 2 years of heavy conflict. They said this in 2017. Collapsing health, water and sanitation systems have cut off 14.5 million people from regular access to clean water and sanitation, increasing the ability of the disease to spread. Rising rates of malnutrition have weakened children's health and made them more vulnerable to disease. An estimated 30,000 dedicated health workers who play the largest role in ending this outbreak have not been paid their salaries for nearly 10 months. As I said, this was in 2017, and the situation has not improved, and it's been 3 more years. The World Health Organization estimates that COVID-19 could affect 55% of the population of Yemen and kill more than 40,000 people, because supplies aren't getting in. And that's because of numerous reasons. There's a Saudi blockade that was placed on Yemen a few years ago, and that's all around it. It's like a border, a barrier. You can't get supplies in or out, and medics don't have access to the tools that they've been trained to use, so they don't know how to deal with any of this stuff. They can't. And healthcare workers are also very vulnerable, and they're not being protected at all. The Houthis have been alleged to downplay the coronavirus pandemic, claiming that Americans have been working for years to benefit from the virus. They've criminalised the US through their propaganda. And this isn't me saying, I'm trying to be as objective as possible in this. This isn't me saying that the US has had a hand in this or has not, but this is how the Houthis have flipped the pandemic on its head and made it seem like it's not an important issue. America is one of Saudi Arabia's strategic allies, and since Obama's presidency in 2009, the US has sold $110 billion in arms to Saudi Arabia. So again, it's not that these allegations are unfounded, it's just conspiracies at the end of the day, and I'm trying to at least expose everything else. I don't really want to go into like the politics and so on. I think that both sides have their faults and so on, but I think that it's the people that aren't directly involved but are being forced to be involved that we need to be focusing on. Right now, rebels control the most populated areas in Yemen, and they've reported relatively low infection rates, which are hard to believe because of how bad everything was before. You can't say there have only been a couple hundred deaths because of this pandemic. But the thing is, if there were to be an imposition of some form of lockdown in any of these locations where the economy is based, the economic activity which directly funds the Houthis' military offence and their resources would stop. So again, it's all tactical, and it's hard to split all these things up because they're so deeply intertwined. The war doesn't look like as if it's going to be ending anytime soon, and that further endangers the Yemeni population. A man in Yemen, he is a medical engineer and he works on the front lines. His name is Luai Taha al-Mabashi, and he said that if the world doesn't help Yemen now, it's going to be a really big disaster for my country. Yemen is going to be deleted from maps all over the world. The situation is really dangerous. In mid-May, around 500 people died with corona-like symptoms in Aden, a city in the north of Yemen, which is where the Houthis and other insurgent groups have taken over. I say corona-like because there are no specialists there to diagnose anything. According to the owner of the city's cemetery, nobody knows what the disease is exactly. They sometimes say it's the plague, other times chikungunya or malaria. We don't know what the reality is, and there are no specialists to confirm what disease exists. Before this, there was little report of any cases in Yemen, so it's clear to see that the spread there must be rife and growing quickly, regardless of if it was underreported or not. The fact that in 1 week, 500 people died because of this, whatever it is, most likely coronavirus, highlights the dire situation that's happening over there. Lastly, I want to draw your attention to the experiences of the children, of the Yemeni children right now, and what they have been for a while, and how they've been affected by coronavirus, by the cholera outbreak, etc. So any remaining infrastructure was destroyed by coronavirus. Millions are now starving, sick, and dying. 12.3 million children are now in desperate need of humanitarian aid, and up to 18 million could die by the end of this year if not provided with it. Most of Yemen has been dependent on the continued aid by activist and humanitarian groups, but this has been stopped due to the virus. 1.7 million plus children have fled from their homes, and 4.3 million children are estimated to be in direct danger of being armed for the ongoing war. They're killed in combat, forced to patrol or fight, and left to die every day. COVID and cholera are killing everyone. When I say that they're starving, I think that it's really, really hard for most people to understand what starvation actually feels like. I myself will say, oh yeah, I'm so hungry, I'm starving if I haven't eaten for a couple of hours after waking up. But I mean that these people are surviving on an acidic stew made of leaves. That's it. We're talking water and imagine just spinach. And that's it, and that's what you have to feed your family. A few grains here and there. It's hard for them to survive. It's hard for them to stay alive, and they're just being hit with all of these different things. They have no say in anything, and so yeah, those in poverty are being offered cash payments during the war. Aid is used as a weapon. In 2015, the Saudi-led coalition formed the sea, air and land barrier, that's what I mentioned earlier, and that's all around Yemen, so it's hard to get supplies in and out, and a lot of people are in desperate need. The Houthis are blamed for making aid even more inaccessible because they've been alleged to have been blocking, destroying and stealing any aid that's been sent in or out of the country. It's impossible. It's hard to imagine any aid being getting to anyone who needs it anymore. According to UNICEF, before COVID-19, around 2 million children were out of school, which already is a horrific number that we should have been working to changing before all of this. But now, because of the pandemic, which has only really been here for the past half year, schools have been closed around the country, leaving some 7.8 million children unable to access education. As the coronavirus spreads, tens of thousands more children could develop life-threatening severe acute malnutrition over the next 6 months, while the overall number of malnourished children under the age of 5 could increase to a total of 2.4 million. An example of the harmful consequences of this is that nearly a third of children between 2 and 5 years old in Yemen suffer from serious retardation. The education cluster estimates that more than 1,000 schools have been damaged and that almost 200 schools are being used as shelter. The aftermath of the war, although it continues, has made it difficult and dangerous to live. Unexploded bombs and unstable buildings are all real and imminent threats to innocent Yemenis. The infant mortality rate is very high, with 30% of newborns being of inadequate weight. Sexual abuse, abduction, being married off to much older men, killing and maiming of children are all horrific acts which Yemenis face. Child labour of over a fifth of children between 5 to 14, slave treatment, child trafficking and forced marriages of potentially more than 30% of girls under 18, female genital mutilation of an estimated quarter of girls. There's so much. And this has been going on before. I think that the only reason that Yemen has even been put into the news is because of more recent spikes in the cholera outbreak or the coronavirus or the war. All of this other stuff, never mentioned, ever. Even one of these things. If I were to just pick one and say abduction of children is very high over there. Or marrying your child off for money when they're 12, 13, 14. Your daughter being pregnant when your sister, assuming that everyone who watches this is around my age, your younger sister being sold, married off for money, being pregnant because you need to survive. Just the emotional side of it, just imagining how that would make you, your family feel, that is literally the worst thing imaginable. And then you go on to the other things, the sexual abuse, the child labour, the slave treatment. And this is of children. And I'm quite biased towards children, I always have been, no matter what it is. Because I think that if you're going to change something, it's going to be with the children. Unfortunately, you can't save everyone, and it's always the children and the elderly, but the children are the ones with the lives ahead of them. They're the ones who can go on to make these policy changes and do all these things that even we probably can't do, and our parents definitely can't do. And so it's really, really hard to see that all of this potential and all of these lives are being wasted and exploited in the midst of nationwide suffering and nationwide tensions. And so I think that the world has turned a blind eye on Yemen. I didn't know about it until very recently, and it doesn't get enough news coverage, doesn't get enough coverage in the slightest. And I think that now's the time for us to stand up and help as much as we can, because it's extremely serious, and I don't think that we're paying enough attention to it. I'm going to put some links in the description for some organisations which are trying to help the Yemenis get through this, to literally keep them alive. And I really hope that you guys can donate literally anything. As I said, it's only $7.82 to provide a Yemeni with oral vaccinations that will keep them healthy, or at least safe from cholera. Not there aren't other diseases and so on that are rife there, but that in itself is quite cheap. And honestly, I think that everyone can do something, even if you don't think that it's very, very important, because I mean, if it's not that your money will go to, it will go to providing them with clean water, or at least those drops that can make water more sanitary, or provide them with food, or just anything. That there are so many problems that you think that we have here, or you think that there are in America or wherever. It's worse there. And I understand that obviously, just because your problems don't seem important, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be dealt with in the same with the same kind of reactions. But I think that right now we need to be a bit less selfish, and we need to we need to look around, because frankly, with the pandemic that we're all living through right now, that's already made everyone be more selfless, I guess, brought communities together and so on. But we have to remember that this isn't the only thing that other people are dealing with. We've been out of school or out of work, and that's it. Like, it's been a bit boring, but that's it. In conclusion, because I assume this video would have been quite long, I just want you to like know that this is happening, and I want you to be acutely aware, not just Yemen is suffering, or not just there's a war over there. I want for you to just think about it for a second, and just like imagine for just a moment that that is your life. You know, like you're born and you're already underweight, and there is a 40% chance that you will not be able to function as a normal child who is your age. When say you're 10, you might have the mental capacity of a 2-year-old. And then who's going to take care of you? How will you, if you get sick, if you can't communicate to someone about something, how are you then supposed to live? You know, like, and how are you supposed to, and say you provide for your family, how are you supposed to come home and see that one of your family is sick with something that you can't even put a name to, and then everyone's sick, and then everyone's dying and you can't do anything about it, and even if you are the richest person in the country, you still can't get access to the supplies that you need to save them, and you're literally seeing your loved ones die, and it's either they die by that, or they die by cholera, or they die by being bombed, or they die because they've been put into a war that they shouldn't be fighting. And so I just think that, you know, like, donate, spread awareness. I know that recently everyone's decided that putting stuff on your Instagram is a great way to go, and I guess, like, it is, but that shouldn't be all, because a post, some likes, that doesn't help anyone. No child in Yemen is then going to say, oh, thank you so much for showing this picture of me with my bones sticking out, blah, blah, blah. And now everyone knows, thanks, but I'm still dying. What does it do? And that's why I'm saying, as much as you can do. Like, being selfish has to be a thing of the past, because if this was us, we would hope and pray every day that someone would come and scoop us up and take us away, or someone would come and make our lives better. Because I know that there's always the thing of like, and obviously I'm in England and we just had Brexit, and it's this whole thing of like, immigrants come and they take our jobs and they do all this stuff and blah blah blah. If those people were to come here or to any of these Western countries and they were to be the poorest of the poor, I can guarantee that their standard of living would be 10 times better than it was in Yemen. I can guarantee that. And I think that it's so difficult to look at it in the news and to emote and to actually like sit down, because it's so easy to just turn off the TV. Like, I do it. I see something bad on TV when the whole Black Lives Matter thing was happening. I would just flick off. Even with coronavirus, I don't look at the news anymore. It makes me sad. So, but not looking, especially when it's to do with other people and other demographics, other groups, it can make you, unbeknownst to you, ignorant, or naive at least. Because war is this whole abstract idea, and we learn about like World War I and World War II, but that was 100 years ago. It continues, and it's still going on right now. And I don't want to go on any more about this, but I really want that this is like, at least spiked your interest in this or in other humanitarian issues, and that you can go and look into it further. I'm not saying that I'm going to go on to be like a policymaker, or that I'm going to go on to like change the world or whatever, but I think that knowing about it and actively trying your best to make a change, as long as it's the best that you can do, it's amazing. And so I really, really hope that after this you focus on the news a bit more, or you look into this a bit more, because I've literally scratched the surface. This was 2 hours of research, and I can guarantee that there is so much more that I have not even looked into, that I will probably be finding out continuously as the situation unravels. Because this is years and years of stuff, you know? This has forced me to look more into it and to become interested in it and to become intrigued. And I think that intrigue is the thing that if everyone had it, the world would be a better place. Sweeping statement, I know, but that's what I believe. So I hope that you enjoyed watching, and I hope that you've learned something, and I hope that you can go and tell someone else about this who doesn't know. But yeah, thank you. Oh my goodness. I loved doing this research, and I loved finding out more about it, and I would be so open to doing more videos like this, and hopefully they would get more coherent as I did more of them. And who knows, maybe I'll revisit this topic when I'm better at stringing a couple of sentences together. But yeah, thank you. Obviously, you know, we're still fighting the pandemic at home and all this stuff. Please just be alert, you know, like wear a mask when you go out, and just be aware. Be aware of everything around you, because you may be the main character in your story, but everyone has their own story, and you've got to try and learn about theirs too. So yeah, this has been me, Lydia, and bye.